If men are child free, no one calls them selfish. If men have children, no one is like, that's so selfish of you to have a child. And I think it's really interesting, the discourse of, I have seen it more and more, that having a child is selfish. And I think it's almost like weaponized on the internet sometimes.
Yeah.
Of like the current state of the world, climate change. How could you do that to a child? How can you, do that? And I think sometimes then we internalize it and say, is it wrong to want a child?
Yeah.
Like, because I want a child. And I just firmly believe that desire matters and it's important, and you are allowed to want what you want on either side. You're allowed to want a child. You're allowed to not want a child.
I'm Kelty McGuire, and you're listening to the Kids Are Child Free podcast. Hello and welcome to the Kids Are Child Free podcast. I think we're going to jump into things pretty quickly today because we have another episode of our Dear Former Fence Sitter series. We've got Amanda E. White here, who is a former fence sitter. She is a mom to one. She runs therapy for women. She's a licensed therapist. And her and I are going to be answering a bunch of your different questions on the topic of this kids or child-free choice and whatever aspect of it that you are personally struggling with. So buckle up, get ready. We've got 5 more fantastic questions that we're going to be answering in today's episode. All right, Amanda, you are back for another round of Dear Former Fence Sitter.
I am. I'm excited. Last time was so good, so I'm excited to answer more questions.
Yeah, the feedback was super positive, and we've got a few more questions that we didn't tackle, and we've got a couple more here too. So why don't we just delve right into it and
let's do it.
See what sort of advice we have or counsel. Okay, so question number 1, Dear Former Fence Sitter. I am a 35-year-old woman who has been married for 6 years. My partner and I assumed we would have kids someday, but we weren't in any rush. The last check-in we had about this decision, we acknowledged that as we get older, our desire to have children lessens. Interestingly, I found myself crying in his arms as I allowed myself to grieve the possibility of opting out of parenthood. We have friends' kids in our lives and nieces that we adore. We love being the fun auntie and uncle, and we feel we have the best of both worlds. Last year, I went through Kelty's wonderful Kids Are Child Free program. I met amazing, strong, and resilient women, all in different circumstances, trying to answer this question. It was powerful to be in a supportive and affirming environment. I learned to accept there's nothing wrong with me for not being sure about having kids. I acknowledged that either way, I will be happy and okay. And I agree that both choices will have joy, grief, and possible moments of regret. My question for you, former fence sitter, is where do I go from here? I feel I have asked all the questions and pondered all the scenarios. A child could fit into our lives, and I'm sure we would be good parents. Part of me is curious about being a mom, and the other part of me knows it would blow my life up, and I worry about being resentful of all the changes. My life feels full and wonderful already, like nothing is missing. How can I reconcile these two pieces of myself? Can you offer any words of wisdom or support? Best, Pondering Paige.
I feel like you should answer this question first, Kelty.
Oh my gosh.
It is like, what I hear is I don't know, what she kind of decided when she went through your program.
Mm-hmm.
I think it sounds like maybe she was still undecided and knew both paths would work.
Yeah.
I think that is one of the hardest things about choosing whether to have a child or even multiple children is you have to weigh your current life and how much you love it with this huge unknown, because you don't know how you will 100% feel about having a child until you have one.
Yeah. Reading this and when I got this email, like all I feel is like the deepest empathy and just how much emotion comes up when we are really on the precipice of making this decision, right? I know everyone listening is trying to resolve like kids or child free, but when we feel like we're closing in on a decision, it feels very tender and vulnerable. And I hear that a lot here. On the one hand, I feel like there's maybe sort of a battle happening between the head and the heart, where the head is saying like, it makes sense. And the heart is saying, I feel mixed up. I'm not hearing, for example, and of course this person Pondering Paige will be able to best answer this. I'm not hearing that the head is saying don't have kids and the heart saying kids, but the heart is saying this parts of this hurt.
Yeah.
And I have a lot of love for the life I have without children. And there's also parts of having kids that I know I'll grieve if I decide not to go that path. I mean, this question, like, how do I reconcile these two pieces of myself? And sort of, the overarching idea of like, where do I go from here? It's like, well, we make a decision.
Yeah.
and I think we want to feel totally good before we make a decision, right? We want to feel like, okay, we've dusted off our hands, so to speak, and like, here we go. We make a choice. And I think that reconciliation of these different parts of ourselves, it's something that comes over time as we lean into and live out whatever choice we choose, right? Like I think about yourself, for example, as someone who's chosen to have kids. For you to reconcile the part of you that was, footloose and fancy free as a child-free person, I'm guessing that was something and has been something you've had to do continuously. I don't know. Can you speak to that, or would you agree?
Yeah, absolutely. I think one thing that is maybe unique is that when you do, I mean, your brain does change. If you biologically have a child, I'm sure there are studies that I don't know of just like how adoptive parents, surrogate parents, their brain changes too.
Yeah.
But women, especially, we know hormonally their brains change. So I do think I've struggled more with reconciling between not having more than one child and having one child compared to now that I'm 2 years in, it has been much easier to fully like be in parenting, essentially.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, every time I have like one of my best friends is single and she lives with her sister, who's also my good friend, and they don't have kids. And every time I go hang out with her, I'm like, I don't want to leave. I feel like I'm free and back in like, we're like driving around. I feel like I'm in college again and it feels wonderful. And I think I've just kind of reconciled that I am going to feel conflicting ways sometimes. I would love to be able to pick up and go travel more right now. I also think there is something to be said for reconciling with different seasons of your life.
Yeah.
And one thing that's helped me is just being like, the season that I'm in right now is a really intense season where I'm not going to have a lot of extra energy. The idea of doing any sort of complicated travel is not worth it to me. And I think that's been helpful instead of being like, and when I was on the other side of the fence and deciding, I didn't think of it as seasons at all. I was like, you're a parent, your life is over. That's it. Where now that I'm in it, I can see I will get back to traveling. Or even if you have multiple kids and maybe you don't until they're 18, like you will, God willing, enter a new phase of your life once your kids grow up too.
Yeah.
And I think, looking at your life in phases and seasons can also be helpful.
Yeah, absolutely. I guess I had a couple questions that came to mind or things that I might explore if I were, in Paige's shoes and grappling with the same thing and thinking about like, what is that path that you just can't seem to let go of? Like no matter whether it makes sense or not. It might not even be one path or another, kids are child free, but like what is an aspect of this decision that you are having trouble making peace with?
Yeah.
And your answer to that may indicate, it's just not something that you can let go of. And that may show you the path you need to walk down. It might also show you something you need to grieve or an experience that you need to have or something that you need to feel. But really asking yourself, like, what is that I'm holding on to here so tightly? And again, it makes sense. Like, I think we all hold on to or want to maintain certain aspects of our life, either if we choose to have kids or be child free, or let's say we have to let go of things if we choose to be child free. But like, is there something that there's like sort of a sense of clinging to, or where there's almost this like preemptive heartbreak of like, I don't know if I can let that go.
Yeah.
And trying to let your heart or your emotions answer that question more so than the head.
I think that's a good thing. I would also recommend like come back to your values.
Yeah.
Like really take some time, think about your values, think about what's important to you.
Yeah.
And if it's not in alignment with your values and you're still grieving it, that is totally okay. And that might just be something that you need to grieve compared to it being, we talk a lot about how we don't like right or wrong decisions, but it may not be the decision you come to and you can still grieve it. And I wonder what you think about my answer to this, Kelty, but I do think sometimes you have to grieve much more when you don't have children.
Yeah.
If you were truly on the fence, right? I know there are some people who never question it, just because it is going to be in your face sort of for the rest of your life, compared to it is much more common to have children, and most of my friends all have children. So it is I have less reminders on a day-to-day basis, sort of.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think this is something Paige probably knows, but just in case she doesn't, and for everyone else listening, like this grieving that she is experiencing, expressing, and being held by her partner as she cries, this, possible path she could have walked or could walk of having kids. This is super, super normal. Yes. And it's not the picture of being child-free that we see projected on, social media. But as someone who works with a lot of child-free women to help them become confident in their path, because that's also part of the work I do. And just speaking from a personal standpoint, having feelings of wistfulness or grief or envy or sadness, super, super normal. And I think there's also a point, and this may not be for Paige and where she's at, but for anyone else who feel like they've really like made or have closed in on that decision, to know that difficult emotions don't mean you've made the wrong choice necessarily. They might, but I think part of where we get mixed up and where we have this constant flip-flopping back and forth on our decision, and it probably applies as well for people who've made that decision to have kids and are maybe in that process of trying, is just because you feel panic or you feel sadness or you feel like, oh my God, what have I done? That does not equal wrong decision. It just is part of the process of being a human, making a big life change or embracing a big choice.
Absolutely.
This part here was interesting to me. Part of me is curious about being a mom, and the other part of me knows it would blow my life up. And I worry about being resentful of all the changes. I mean, again, curiosity, yes. Being concerned or potentially resentful, yes. This idea of blowing your life up, I think is just interesting language choice. And this is not a criticism, but I'd be curious about what that is being equated with. What are your thoughts when you hear that? And do you agree? Is it blowing up one's life to have kids? You don't have to give us the nice diplomatic answer. You're like, yes.
It's so funny. And I think this is good context for anyone who talks to parents when they are trying to make this decision, is it is so phase dependent. And I will be like brutally honest and say, like, right now my daughter is 2 and we are in a really rough phase right now. She is a lot. And I think it's also really unfair because like how much it blows your life up, quote unquote, is sort of proportionate to how much like how many resources you have, how much like energy and money a lot of times you have to pay for help. Like my husband and I just had a conversation about we are going to pay for more help because we've been struggling a lot and work is a lot, and we want to find the balance of that. I think it depends on what someone's life would blow up look like, right? Yeah. Like if you're traveling all the time, it may make it much, much more difficult. I don't think kids ever blow up your life in the sense of you can't do things that you want to do, especially if you only have one. But instead, what will happen is your energy will be so drained that some of the things you loved or prioritized, you may just not have the energy to be able to do that.
Yeah, good point. And I do think, I mean, reassemble your life. Absolutely. Like big changes, 100%. And I don't want to like read too much into the language used there, but I have heard other people say similar things about like, ruin my life or like totally destroy my life, whatever it is. And that's a perception thing too. If you look at what it means to, or what you realize like life would look like as a parent, and you see that as blowing up your life, well, that's an indicator to you too. Like, I mean, most people don't want to blow up their life. So that might be pointing you in a certain direction as well. Yeah. I guess the last thing to say, I mean, Paige mentions she's 35 years old, and I certainly can appreciate the drive that we have both biologically as well as societally to make this decision. But I might be curious about really just like, because so deciding not to have kids, of course, it's marked by like a mental, emotional change or shift within you, but outwardly your life may not look entirely different than it did before. Yep. To maybe say like acting as if, or making that decision, starting to make plans, like I've chosen this child-free path, if that is in fact the place she's really leaned into, embracing the grief, embracing those difficult emotions. And if it feels like, you know how sometimes things feel hard, even though they're right. And then sometimes they're hard because it's the wrong thing. And I don't like to, there's nothing like this decision, but you think about like, if you've had a past breakup, sometimes you end the relationship. And even though it's really painful because you love that person, you know, it's the right thing. And sometimes it's this feeling of like, oh my God, what have I done? Yeah. Sort of being able to discern, like, is this painful because I'm closing a door and saying goodbye to a life I thought I might have? Or is it painful because like, every part of me is rejecting this decision? Yeah.
And I think it's really hard when it sounds like Paige is truly so torn.
Yeah, absolutely.
And yeah, I think just in line of what she was saying about blowing up her life, I think like if there was a way to, you know, because she also acknowledged that like having a child, like having a life with a child also would be a beautiful path too. Yeah. So what parts about that, you know, are you interested in? And I always just try to remind people too that like desire is important. Curiosity isn't desire, but like curiosity can also be something like you're allowed to like lean into. Like I knew when I was deciding to have a child, I truly felt like her. I felt like I'm blowing up my life. Yeah. So I sympathize a lot. But I also felt like I want to do this. And it didn't make a lot of sense to me, but I was just like, I want to do this. So I think separating, right, desire, what would it look like in an optimal scenario for you to have a child from, you know, the fear of blowing up your life.
Yeah. All right. Okay, let's go to another question. This one here is from Existential in Florida. That's where you are, right?
Yeah.
Okay, let's see if you can relate to this. All right. Dear former fence sitter, when I make lists of reasons why I want a child and reasons why I don't, I can't help but notice that my pro-child list seems incredibly selfish. For instance, I want more meaning and purpose in my life. I want to experience holidays and vacations with a child. I want to be needed and adored as a mother. I suppose one could argue my child-free list is similarly selfish. For example, I don't want to be sleep-deprived, sick, or financially bound. I guess I don't have a problem with being perceived as selfish as a child-free individual, but I'm really struggling with the idea of creating a human for my own satisfaction. Did you ever experience similar feelings? If so, how did you ultimately overcome or rationalize this? Thanks, Existential in Florida.
I relate so much to this.
Did you write it? Is this like past self Amanda writing to future self?
I actually probably could have written this. Yeah, I relate so much to this. And I also think it is fascinating. Like, it's so fascinating, the word selfish, how we perceive who is selfish. And what I always have to point out is like, men are never called selfish for this.
No, absolutely. Yeah.
Like if men are child free, no one calls them selfish. If men have children, no one is like, that's so selfish of you to have a child. And I think it's really interesting, the discourse of, I have seen it more and more, that having a child is selfish. And I think it's almost like weaponized on the internet sometimes.
Yeah.
Of like the current state of the world, you know, climate change. How could you do that to a child? How can you, you know, do that? And I think sometimes then we internalize it and say, is it wrong to want a child?
Yeah.
Like, because I want a child. And I just firmly believe that desire matters and it's important. And you are allowed to want what you want on either side. You're allowed to want a child. You're allowed to not want a child. I understand completely what she's saying about how it feels, you know, she's fine with being selfish. It sounds like she's just, you know, grappling with being selfish and bringing a child into the world that didn't ask to be brought into the world. But I think where I caution people is if they're having a child because they want it to fix their relationship. Mm-hmm. They think it's the key to making them happy. They think it's the key to solving all of their problems. Like, I truly think sometimes people are like, this is the, I feel complete once I have a child is sort of that narrative. But I think you can absolutely want to have a child. You can want to experience, whether it is she wants to be adored by a child or whether you want to experience being a mother. You can say it different ways, but it is the same thing. And I also believe you can make an argument for like, we need people in the world. We need people raised by intentional, kind, compassionate parents who will like lead their child hopefully towards more we want to see. So I just think you can argue it any way. So because of that, you have to follow your desire.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I feel very similarly to you that I think there's so much shame around wanting what we want in life, whatever that is. And I've heard this line of thinking, and it's probably true, that like, no matter what we do, even if it's, let's say, oh, I'm going to the streets of New Delhi to work with impoverished children. Yes. And like, that also is making you feel a certain way. That's giving you a certain amount of gratification. That's maybe allowing you to feel like justified in your privilege or whatever it is. Like, is there anything that's truly selfless? I mean, this is like a whole other conversation.
Well, did you see the Friends? Do you remember the Friends episode from like a million years ago? Did you watch Friends? The one where
vague.
Yeah, that's true. Okay. Phoebe says she's going to find a selfless deed. And Joey says that there's no selfless deed, and she does a bunch of things to try to prove it.
Yeah.
And the only one she can come up with is, I let a bee sting me. And I didn't like the experience of a bee stinging me, but the bee got to look cool in front of all of his bee friends. And then Joey goes, but the bee died after he stung
True.
me. So they couldn't find one.
No, that's funny. I mean, maybe it's just such like a Phoebe Joey narrative that it sounds familiar, but I'm pretty sure I've seen every episode of Friends. So I'm going to say, I saw that one too. Well illustrated. Thank you.
Yes.
Yeah. I mean, I'm pretty much going to reiterate what you said, maybe just in slightly different words, but I think it's about saying, okay, if I want to feel adored or have the satisfaction or have the fun or the experience. The only thing I would also caution existential in Florida is like, could that potentially be at the expense of your child? Like, would that be putting pressure on your child to your point, like to fulfill a need or to fix something? Because feeling like you've been, and I'm sure there's people listening who can relate, feeling like you've been brought into this world to like fill a very particular gap or void or need for your parent or parents. Kids feel that. I think they know that, right? And so I might also be curious about like, are there other ways in my life in which I can, like, would this feel like the sole way that I can receive like adoration or admiration or what have you? And also just kind of like checking in with yourself, because I think a lot of these things are very normal, right? We want to feel loved. We want to feel seen. We want to feel supported. So I'd have a little bit of like curiosity or maybe a bit of a caution around that, but I don't think there's anything wrong with having a child because you want to have a child, provided that you also feel like you are well-equipped enough.
Yeah.
I'll qualify that to be able to care for that child, right? Mentally, physically, emotionally. It doesn't mean you have to be like world's best parent, but if you're like, oh, I'm in a really bad situation such that I couldn't provide for my child's most basic and emotional needs, but I want a child, so I'll do it anyways. I think that may not be the best course of action, but provided you're like ready enough, I think it's okay to want it. It's great to want it, right?
Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, the last thing on that I would say is like, I think our desires can like carry us really far in this world. And if we, and in doing hard things, right? Like I'm guessing that desire in the face of, or with a lack of evidence to say like, this makes sense, has probably carried you through these terrible twos you're in.
Yes, definitely.
Yeah. Yeah. Whereas if you didn't have that like quote, selfish desire, maybe it would be even more challenging.
Yeah, absolutely.
The time has come. The next round, the summer session of my Kids Are Childfree group coaching program is kicking off on June 18th. Now, can you just imagine if rather than spending your time and energy this summer ruminating on this Kids Are Childfree choice, being awake in the wee hours thinking, oh my God, what am I going to do? I'm closing in on my 35th birthday, my 38th, my 40th, what have you. I know how it goes. Imagine if instead you got to really enjoy this summer. You could be out paddleboarding on the lake, or you could enjoy backyard drinks with friends, knowing that you have a plan in place and that you are going through a process to figure out whether kids or child-free is the choice for you. Well, if you join our Kids or Child-Free group program summer session, you're in store for just that, because you're going to, over the course of 12 weeks, in a group of like-minded women, be guided on a journey to take you from confusion to clarity on your kids or child-free choice. If that sounds all kinds of incredible, you're going to want to check out the details, which I will share in the show notes of today's episode. Again, this is my 12-week Kids or Child-Free group coaching program. We are kicking things off June 18th. And you, of course, can also find details over at kidsorchildfree.com under the Work With Me tab. Alrighty, let's see what we have here next. We've got a question here from the chronic daydreamer. I love these. Dear former fence sitter, I'm so grateful for this podcast and the resources that you share. I recently listened to the episode with Dr. Ruth Chang, and her thoughts on how commitment to a choice adds value to that choice were extremely helpful. I have been decisive on most big decisions in my life, but when I really try to be real with myself, I can admit that I am slow to put the actual actions in place. I can get stuck in the fantasy over the reality. If I commit to not having children, there are certain things that I feel will be important for me to do instead, like cultivating a more consistent creative writing practice, hopefully publishing more one day, and traveling as much as possible with my husband. If these things don't happen, I don't know that I will be happy being child-free. Is this still me living in too much of my fantasy of the path? Or is this me committing? How can you tell? Please help. The chronic daydreamer. Interesting. I always am a little bit curious when someone says their decision is contingent upon one or two really specific things. Mm-hmm. And it's not to say we shouldn't have a child or not have a child for these reasons, but oftentimes they show up in the form of like assumptions we're making about what our child might be like or what parenthood might be like. Or certain expectations we have around that life, and vice versa with being child-free. And so saying, if these things don't happen, I don't know that I will be happy being child-free. I would first of all look at like which of these things are within my control and to what extent. Mm-hmm. Like you may not be able to control whether you're published from a proper publishing house, but you can control if you self-publish, for example. Yep. You talk about having a consistent creative writing practice. That's something that you can control. Yeah. And so it's interesting to an extent to think about if I don't get those things, then I'll basically be like resentful and bitter about it. Yeah. The resentment and bitterness, and again, I'm putting words in this person's mouth, but like those feelings would, for the most part, be as a result of your own actions or lack of action. But mm-hmm. But in a way, you kind of have an excuse of being like, well, it's because I'm child-free. Mm-hmm. And therefore, this isn't a good life and I'm not happy. So I guess, I would encourage this person to really think about and like empower themselves to say, I can't control so many things in this world, mm-hmm. but there are a lot of things that are within my control. And by the way, some of those things that you mentioned, I would also encourage you to be open to the fact that you could still pursue those with a child. Mm-hmm. And I know, for example, Amanda, you run a very successful business. Mm-hmm. You're a writer, like you publish on your Substack. You've got at least a couple podcasts now. So like, I would be also a little bit, I guess, aware of creating this sort of dichotomy mm-hmm. of like my child-free life would be this way and being with mm-hmm. kids would not. To answer the question, is this you living in fantasy? I think we are in general just capable of so much more than we usually mm-hmm. think we are. Does it feel like a fantasy for you, or does it feel like something that's possible, right? Like I'm the only one who can tell you, I'm not the person who can tell you if you're living in fantasy land or not. Yeah. I don't, from an outside perspective, I'm like, absolutely, you can do those things, but are you willing to actually do them and do the work? Or is it easier to fantasize about what that life would be like? Mm-hmm. Those are just a few initial thoughts. But over to you, Amanda, now that you've come up with your brilliant answer.
I don't know. No, I agree with a lot of what you said, Kelty. I think we get into trouble as human beings when we say anything will be a certain way. And I think that is one of the big like traps that maybe keeps us stuck in this decision is fully mapping out what each path would look like and expecting it to go that way. Because whether you have a child or not, there are millions of factors that will impact how your life is and whether it's fulfilling. And I think the other thing I would say too is, and I know it's so hard when you're not on the other side of it, I think that your life is going to change regardless, and you will change regardless. And like, what if this person, for example, starts writing, travels a lot, and then they decide that there's like another project that comes up and they don't have time to write for a bit, but you chose the project. Is that really like, you know, to use a very overused phrase online, is that really abandoning yourself? Yeah. Or is it just new information was presented, new choices were presented, and then you took the best choice based on that? And I think that that's why I really come back to like desire and values, because those are things we can often kind of hold on to a bit more than just mapping things out. And I relate to her because I had really strong beliefs before I had a child of like, if you ever see me doing this, I've lost the plot as a parent.
Let me guess, I will be
I will be horribly disappointed in myself if I don't at least go on, you know, one international traveling, you know, vacation or whatever a year, which I have not. I have not traveled like since really having a child beyond like very easy things. But I don't feel like I've lost the plot, or I don't feel like I'm bad or wrong, or that motherhood was the wrong decision. I just am like, again, my priorities have changed and I'm choosing this. And I think we forget how much choice we have step by step in every decision. Maybe if I felt differently, if work was left crazy, if I had a different child, I don't know, whatever, I could have like really prioritized traveling or doing other things that I thought were the most important things to do, but I don't. And it doesn't feel like I've lost myself. It just feels like I've changed and I'm in a season.
Yeah.
And maybe I will come back to that. And I think we are setting ourselves up for failure regardless of the side if we feel like we will only be fulfilled on either path if it goes this way. Because to your point, Kelty, like there are things that are out of our control. You know, even if you have a child, you don't know if you'll stay married. And I was someone who was like, if I ever have to raise a child by myself, like it would be the worst thing in the world. I will, you know, my life will be over.
Yeah.
But I mean, obviously I don't want to get divorced or anything like that. But like, I wouldn't like regret my decision. I don't think if something happened, because I've created all these new experiences with my child, but it's so hard to imagine having a child when you don't have one, because you don't know this being that doesn't exist yet.
Yeah, absolutely. I think this is kind of reflective. What I'm going to say of this piece around like values and what's really important to you is I would maybe be asking myself, dear writer, who all these fabulous like chronic daydreamer.
Existential. Oh, chronic daydreamer. The other one was existential.
I know. I was also going to say existential in Florida, but that's our prior question. The chronic daydreamer. What's really at the core of those things that feel important to you for your child-free path, right? The one that you're like, it has to be this way. Because to me, it's like, I've had to ask myself this, right? For example, traveling something also really important to me.
Yep.
Look at the pandemic. What if we can't travel anymore? What if because of climate change, they limit how many carbon credits we have and how often we can take a plane, a car, or a train, what have you? What if I am not as able-bodied and it's not or my health prevents me from traveling?
Yes.
And to ask yourself, you know, if I feel like my child-free life is solely about that, then that's something worth paying attention to as you're making this decision. But what's at the core of that desire to travel? Is it meeting new people? Is it having new experiences? Is it experiencing different cultures? Well, there are different ways we can do that. And some of those we don't even have to leave our home, right? And like, I'm not saying there's something just like traveling. Like I always say to my clients, it's not like a hole-in-one solution or replacement. But what I'm hearing here is like new experiences, creativity, maybe some like autonomy and independence to pursue things. The things you're talking about are a vehicle for something else. So asking like, what's really like, what are you transporting, if you will, or what's the experience that you're looking to have. That might help you be a little bit looser in terms of holding the reins. Like, I'm all for having a big goal, but if you're going into this like, all right, I have to do these things, otherwise my child-free life's going to suck. Well, that's a lot of pressure to put on yourself.
Yeah, I completely agree.
Yeah. But keep daydreaming, and fantasies can become reality.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay, this next one, Amanda and I had a quick debrief on this beforehand. We're like, ooh, okay, this is, I mean, you might have noticed the theme with a lot of these answers is like, we don't totally know, right? Here's some questions you can ask yourself. Here's some things that you can think about. Something that'll come up in our answer to this question, but I think we kind of operate with this assumption, making this decision that there's like a fixed right answer that lives out there in the universe. And I think you and I both don't really agree with that.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. So we might speak to that here. But without further ado, here is the question. Dear former fence sitter, a year ago, I felt confident that I did not want to have children ever. So I got an I.U.D. A month later, things changed and I was picking out baby names. WTF. I still feel very much that I don't want kids, but now there's all these doubts in my head. Do you think it's the hormones that changed my mindset? Or is it because my choice was taken away, so I want what I can't have now? Or I'm just going crazy. Signed, there's no signature. What should we call this person? I.U. don't? I don't know. I.U.D. All right, dear I.U. don't. What do you think, Amanda? There's a bunch of questions there, but what's your take on this?
Okay, well, I don't think it would be the hormones. I don't think getting an I.U.D. would necessarily create a lot of hormones that would make you feel that way necessarily. I think it's more likely that you're walking further down the path. Like you took a piece of action. You took a step. I also would remind you that you can take out your I.U.D. Like you can, like it is a reversible choice if this continues and you feel like you've made the wrong decision. But it sounds like you know that you don't want to have children, but you took this step and you've been thinking about it a lot more. And what I hear, right, if we're talking about as we choose a path, we go through grief. I'm hearing, right, there are different stages of grief, and I'm really hearing like bargaining. Like you're doing like a last ditch sort of effort of trying to bargain with this, which is a normal thing to feel a lot of times after we've taken a first step. And I think I can speak to this not just in child-free or not choice, but in any choice in life. A lot of times, you know, we get a job that we are really excited about and we can't wait. And then we like show up to work the first day or, you know, we sign the contract and there's a little bit of resistance that comes up for us. Or I've heard it many times before with people where they get pregnant and then they panic and they're like, oh my God, I don't know if I made the right decision. Or people get the baby home from the hospital and they panic. So I don't think we can always rely on just how we feel emotionally when we're trying to decipher the choice. I would stay a lot more centered on that she really feels like it's the right choice for her and her life. And this is probably just some grief she's going through. And one thing you can maybe do to help with resistance is remember that if you did wake up in a couple years, there might still be a possibility if you change your mind that you could have a child.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, you've said it here twice. I.U. don't. I don't even know what that means. It just seems like a catchy name. I felt confident I did not want children ever. And then she says, even with picking out the baby names, I still feel very much that I don't want kids now. Okay. So we're hearing that affirmed, reaffirmed. I think we need to remember, even we get to, first of all, decide what guides our decisions. And for some people, it's like if let's just say there is a hormonal yearning or like I.U.D. aside, I know I've heard from people like, oh, I really feel like somebody flipped a switch and I'm really wanting to have a child. We can make different arguments about why that happens, whether that's biological or societal or both. We have the power to be able to override that, right? I often tell my clients, my emotions, my hormones, I bless my husband, handsome guy walks by on the street with a nice cologne. And I'm thinking, I'm going to follow this guy down the street. Men are supposed to do that to women. So I shouldn't joke about following men down the street. But I know better than that because I love my husband. I know why I've chosen our relationship. I'm not going to do that. And so even in the instance,
that's such a good example, Kelsey.
you can use that example. Yeah, right. But like, or it's like, I want to we have fantasies about screaming at the person in the street who cut us off in traffic. But we don't need to actually act in that way. So let's just say, even if it were the hormones, then I'm a little confused. It says it changed my mindset. And yet you're saying your mindset, you don't, is that you still don't want to have kids. Now, I would agree with Amanda. I think, and whether we call it grief, whether we call it just being mixed up, it's this extinction burst. They refer to it sometimes as this last ditch hurrah of like, oh, I'm really for sure. And to Amanda's point, maybe not for sure because this isn't done. Making this decision. Try not to judge yourself, like being like, oh, am I going crazy? Like, what's wrong with me? Being like, oh, this is really interesting that this is happening. Yeah. And by the way, picking out baby names, I had a list of baby names at one point in a phone that broke. Very sad because I hope to share them with friends having children. That is an exercise that I think a lot of us do. It's a creative exercise. It's one that we've probably been brought up with, as girls, young women. You can read into that if you want, but I wouldn't give it too much credence. It's I don't know. Anything else?
I don't think so.
Yeah. I don't think you're probably going crazy. But the only thing here, like sometimes when we ask ourselves these consecutive questions, I'll ask my clients just to sit with it and be like, which of those statements feel most true to you or kind of resonate with you? So, is it the hormones? Is it that my choice was taken away because I can't have it? Am I going crazy? Like, do any of those ring or feel especially true to you?
Yeah.
And even if it is, let's say, because your choice is taken away and now you want what you can't have, again, it doesn't mean you need to do that. And I would, for you, remind yourself why you have chosen this path of not having children, like compile the evidence, if you will, because we're all going to have, I think, shaky moments, just like Amanda needs to remind herself why she's choosing motherhood when her 2-year-old's throwing a tantrum or whatever.
Or even like I only have one child and I'm like, pretty firm. I get rid of the stuff like in the next phase, and every time I have to give away like the next phase of thing, my husband and I go, are we sure? Are we sure? Yeah. And we have to do that, even though we're pretty sure. I think we're, we sold the snoo, which is like the most expensive.
Oh, I hear the snoo is amazing.
The most expensive thing you can ever get. So once we sold the snoo, I was like, this feels pretty done to buy another snoo. But yeah, I just think that, I look at it almost, or I visualize it for myself, and maybe this will help this person. I visualize it as like life's current will always like pull a little bit. It is, especially like most people have a child. Most people have more than one child. So life's current is going to pull at you sometimes. Yeah. But that just because you feel knocked off balance or you feel pulled by it or you have moments of desire or thoughts or grief, again, it's like your values and your desires and that you can stay rooted even if you feel those pulls. Yeah. And if you can maybe externalize that, it can help you feel like it's not me going, like it's not, when I feel that pull, I can visualize it as it's society. It's my child's 2. I'm watching people pregnant or having kids that are, they're second and the same age as my daughter or whatever. But it's not me deciding that. And if all of those factors didn't exist, I don't think I would feel this intense pull. Yeah. If most people I knew only had one child, I think I wouldn't feel that pull. Yeah. So maybe that's also an exercise for you, I.U.D. don't, to think about like the external forces that might be pulling you and what you actually know about yourself.
Yeah. Well said. Thank you. Okay, we have our final question here. Dear former fence sitter, I am in my mid-30s and beginning to feel more certain about my choice to remain child-free. Before I turned 30, I think I always just assumed that I would one day have kids, but I never really imagined it in detail. As someone who imagines most things in detail, I think this is probably telling. I am, however, someone who values the relationships in my life more than anything else. I am lucky to remain very close with my siblings and childhood friends, and I like that being child-free allows me to put more of my time and energy into these relationships. But as more and more of my family and friends choose the path of parenthood, I am worried that this will impact the closeness that I now feel with them. I know that they will have less time and that I will need to spend time with them in different ways, and I am fine with that. But up until now, I have shared my major life experiences with them. And now they are experiencing something momentous that I am not. How do you maintain a feeling of closeness across this divide? Will I just have to accept that things will change as our paths diverge? Thanks for this podcast and all the resources that you share. Sincerely, the odd one out.
Well, my thoughts are, I do think that life changes no matter what we do, right? Whether you choose to have a child or you don't, your life and your relationships will change. I do think that she highlighted something very important, that she likes that she has more time to spend with these relationships. And I do think that's actually a really big advantage that people don't talk about enough.
Yeah.
Like when you are on the other side, I think there is, and you can talk more about this, Kelty, I think there is this fear and thought of, well, I should just have a child and then I will be able to spend more time with people, with all their children who are hanging out. And what I can say is, as a parent, I don't find that to be the case necessarily, because you're just busier and they're busier. So it's even harder sometimes to find time. And I think it's pretty rare, unless you live in like this great cul-de-sac neighborhood, or you have family that's all close and it's cousins. So there's, or you're really intentional about it. I think that it's a myth in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
And I think the other thing that, maybe she feels differently than me, but I personally don't really love spending tons of times with my friends, with my kids and their kids. I liked it better when I wasn't a parent, because I was able to be fully present, where it is really hard for me to be present with my friends and be present with my child while it's like two half presences interacting compared to a full presence and the half presence of the parent if their child is there. So yeah, I think you would have more things in common. You would have more things to talk about. You may be able to text a lot about different challenges or things that are going on in your child's life. But as she already alluded to, I think that you can be the most incredible friend to your parent. You can, if you're willing to, have it be the one who kind of goes to them and puts in more effort. I think you potentially have a shot of even being closer to them while being child-free, and really just being such a wonderful force in these, especially your family's life, your close friends' lives, your nieces, nephews, pseudo nieces and nephews, because parents struggle. And I really believe the world needs child-free people and parents, and we need to all be on the same team and support each other together.
Absolutely. No, coming at this from the perspective of being child-free, here's a little example. We go back to Canada once or twice a year. We have good friends that we make a point of seeing every time we go there. They have two kids, age 8 and 10. When we were back there in September, they're like, honest to God, we've seen you guys more since you moved to Germany than we see most of our friends who live here in North Vancouver or Vancouver. Because to your point, they're all busy doing different activities. They don't necessarily take that initiative to make plans. Whereas we're like, okay, we're coming. Let's meet at a brewery. Okay, we'll bring pizza. Let's do the thing.
Yeah.
And so, knowing, especially, and this isn't something that we're trying to thrust upon any child-free person that doesn't want to have heavy involvement with their friends' kids and the family life, et cetera. But what I'm hearing here is those relationships are important, both with parents as well as the children. I totally agree that you have an opportunity to be such an important person in these people's lives. I love how you say showing up as a full presence, but you don't have to compromise in the same ways of well, my kid goes down at this time, but we need to be at my place with the bed and they don't like this. And it's hey, I'll just show up. Let me know what I can do. And to also, I think a lot of times, I think about myself versus perhaps my, at least my sister-in-law's siblings, not all of whom have kids, but 2 of the 3 have kids. They're very busy and immersed in their own kids' lives. One of whom, for example, is living here in Germany. They see each other. The kids can play together. It's great. But when I'm flying back there, when my second niece or nephew, the niece will be born, I'm okay, what can I do? I can cook, we can go out together, I can really be there, I can support, I can be like that fully invested auntie because I don't have kids for myself. Like there's no other little people competing for my attention. So I mean, on this last point of feeling like that outsider, I think partly we need to be okay with being the person who's different. And again, looking at that as a strength as rather than a downfall. And to know that even if you were to have kids, that's just part of the life experience of just somebody's feel different. I don't know if you ever feel like this with other people with kids where you're like, wow, they're really doing it different, or I would not approach that at all, or that way, or their kid's a brat, or like, you know, getting advice from like an in-law that has a different perspective. Like that can also make you feel like an outsider, or you homeschool and they don't, or vice versa. Like those things will show up no matter what in your relationships. And if anything, I would guess having kids might highlight some of those differences even more.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I think there is this fantasy that our friends will all have kids at the same time as us or our siblings or whatever. And we will just like be this big happy family and raise all of our kids together. And I think the reality is a lot more complicated than that because it's, you know, unless your kids are really young, it's rare that I'm sure people can think about their own life experiences. It's rare for a couple to like another couple the same amount. And then you add kids into that as well. And then you have the kids be the same around the same ages. It doesn't always happen that way. And yeah, I think that I think the other factor that's interesting in all of this is sometimes parents, when they're with their children all the time, or at least I'll speak for myself, like I sometimes see I do see my friends who don't have kids more than my friends who have kids because they're more flexible. They're able to meet me where I am. We're not coordinating, you know, most of my friends have multiple kids. We're not coordinating like 3 or 4 kids' schedules plus our own schedules. We're just coordinating my one child schedule. And yeah, I just think that it's a rare fantasy that everyone gets along and we're like a big happy family. And there are lots of like, sometimes as a parent, I don't even want to spend time with my friends who have kids because I'm so drained from my own child. I don't want to then add more children to the mix. And maybe I'm the weird one by saying that.
No.
But yeah, I think it can be a bit of just a fantasy that, you know, social media and movies and TV sort of project. And it's typically it is typically hard when you have kids to then schedule time with other people's kids all the time.
Yeah. Honestly, like this, hearing what you have to say about this last question is such a breath of fresh air. And it's also perfect timing because I'm hosting a session in about an hour today around friendships as a child-free person, both with moms as well as finding other child-free friends. And I think you bring up a lot of really important points. It's so easy when you're the person without kids to feel like you're constantly on the outs and that you don't understand something that everyone else does. And of course that can be true to an extent, but you just raise like all kinds of great points about the benefits of also being child-free and like what we can offer to our friends who have children.
Yeah. I mean, I think even like an example is like I have a neighbor across the street from me whose child is the same age as my daughter. They're both young. They like spending time with each other, but she and I are just completely different people with very different values. And we, you know, and I play outside with my daughter on our driveway like almost every day and we don't see them a ton. And I think like before I had had children, I would be like, oh my gosh, if there's a person with like a child, you know, and there's another kid down the street who's the same age as our kids too. And I really like them, like we're friendlier with them, but we still don't see them a lot. Like I just think to tie it back to friends, I don't know, like they're, you know, like we sometimes have this idea of just that we can all get along and all live the same life forever. And it's wonderful if it can happen for some people, but I think the reality is just more complicated for most.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. That was our last question. Good work. Those are some great questions, everyone. Look forward to delving into more someday soon.
Yeah.
We'll be airing this episode in a few weeks' time. So I look forward to everyone's feedback on it. Of course, now people are listening to it in real time. So let us know if you have other questions that you want answered in future episodes of our Dear Former Fence Sitter series. Just send me a DM or an email and we'll get it answered. So
yeah. And if anyone wants to hear more about like only child life or wants any content like in written form, you can check out my Substack, Fence Sitter.
It is so good. Definitely check out Amanda's Substack. I was going to say, like, where can we find you? What do we need to know about? Yeah. No, it's all good. I'm glad you reminded me. Otherwise, I might have just said goodbye, to be honest.
So, yeah.
Okay, perfect. Well, we will link to Substack, your Substack, as well as you have a great podcast called Nuance Needed, which I know addresses different kinds of topics outside of this decision. But
yeah,
I also know you and I are both on the same page as far as this decision. This decision definitely needs more discussion with nuance. So I think a lot of the principles can apply well to this decision. Yeah. And I can only recommend the Substack, the Fence Sitter Substack. I think it's $5 a month. It's well worth it. There are some podcasts that you have on there. There's a conversation with me. I was on the podcast. Yeah. I've been listening to some of the conversations with other people who are moms who were former fence sitters. Your piece about your top parenting hack or move being a mother to an only child, I really love. So lots of good stuff there to discover from Amanda. So
awesome. Well, this was so fun. Thanks for having me, Kelty.
Thank you for joining me. That concludes another episode of the Kids or Childfree podcast. Thank you so much for tuning in for today's conversation. Now, if you have not already done so, first of all, I want you to give us a follow over on Instagram. Our handle is @KidsOrChildFree. Otherwise, I will link to that in the show notes. And what I would love for you to do is to slide on into my DMs and let me know who would you like to hear on the podcast as an upcoming guest. This can either be someone in particular that you would love for me to have a conversation with, or maybe it's a certain type of guest. There's somebody in particular that you are wanting to hear from, whether that be, hey, Kelty, I want to hear from somebody who had kids later in life, or I want to hear from somebody who specializes in childhood trauma, or whatever it may be. Let me know who you want to hear from, who would be an ideal guest, and I will do my very best to get them onto the podcast for a future episode.